Hi Simon, thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Ethan. Thanks for inviting me on. We finally made it. We've been trying to do this for a few months. I'm doing okay, thank you. I'm all right. Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, we have had it planned a while, so it's great to finally speak to you.
Yeah, yeah. Life gets in the way, you know what I mean? Sometimes we don't always have an hour and a half to chat to people, unfortunately. But there you go.
Well, with my guests, I like to go back to the start. You had a tough childhood, really, didn't you?
Uh, yeah. I mean, these things are all kind of relative, but I think losing losing a parent when you're 11. I mean, grandparents, but I had one grandparent, and basically in the space of 3 years, I lost my aunt, who was my mum, my dad's sister, who was like a kind of second mum to us. She committed suicide. My father died suddenly when I was 11, sort of a couple of years after that, and my grandfather, my mum's father, had come to live with us, and then he died. There was a lot of death. One of my best friends at primary school dropped dead in front of me. I mean, basically, by the time I was 12, I'd seen three dead bodies, which, if you're unfortunate to have been born in a country at war is kind of difficult enough. But um, when you're sort of in a shabby seaside town called Weston-super-Mare, that's not normal, I wouldn't imagine. So that was quite difficult, and I suppose apart from the actual tragedy of losing family members so young, it just drags you kicking and screaming into the real world. That life. I mean, we were just talking just before we started there. We're both massive football fans, and you just think, Diogo Jota, 28 years old, plays for my team, three kids, got married last week, killed in a car crash. I mean, so life is precious, and yeah, life is precious, and I try to not take it for granted. I don't always manage that, but I try to not take it for granted. And my childhood with all that tragedy, and then you know a few years of being sexually abused at boarding school to add to that kind of chasm of despair already. um, I think that falls into the category of difficult. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. Music was kind of your saviour, though, wasn't it?
music and football.
Yeah, yeah.
Music and football. And I don't know if he gets tired of me saying this, but we're still friends to this day. But shortly after, what kind when I say music, when music was my savior, it absolutely was. And I don't say that lightly. It wasn't something that happened in the background of my life. It kind of was there at the forefront of every day of my life. And reeling from the tragedy of losing my father, and a gentleman by the name of Martin Johnson, who I said we're still friends to this day. He was a few years older than me at the school, but he came into my room at school. I was in this shabby, like in two bob boarding school, um, just outside Coventry. And anyway, he came into my room with a C90 cassette, and it had like the Who and the Pistols and the Ruts specials. A kind of, I suppose if you were being unkind, a bunch of sort of white blokes with guitars making a racket was mainly. But hey, I was a white kid that needed that, so it was the music of I suppose alienation and anger and frustration and punk, post punk, the kind of the Who and all that stuff. And that cassette, yeah, that cassette just got worn out. I just played it every night, with my headphones on, and I suppose it gave me some kind of comfort. Yeah.
I've read your autobiography. It's a brilliant book.
Thank you.
To I
High.
can't remember the lyrics. It's from the
Too
one.
high, too far, too soon. From the whole of the moon by the Waterboys. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's about like your struggles with drug addiction. When did drugs come into your life then?
Well, I'm a bit hardcore when it comes to what defines drugs. I mean, alcohol's a drug.
Yeah,
Alcohol as a drug kills more people every day than all the rest of the drugs put together. Um, and to quote, so cigarettes and alcohol um, were my first drugs because they're the first ones you could get your hands on. You know, back in 1980, I think when I started smoking fags, and so cigarettes and alcohol. I mean, were there problems straight away? I mean, I think you can get away with smoking tabs for a few years. You know what I mean? Don't try that at home, kids. That's not a recommendation. I mean, my daughter's 17 and she's struggling with roll-ups at the moment. The other day, I said, look, you know, just try to not smoke fags, but you're all right for a while. Don't worry about it. You know, don't make it because that's the truth of it, really. You know, I try and when I talk about this subject, addiction, drugs, you know, I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do. I can only speak from my own experience. And, you know, cigarettes and cider and then amphetamine and weed for a good few years was fucking bang on. You know, it was great. You know, it allowed me to, I suppose, exist inside myself in a world that seemed hostile and unfair and cruel but in all that. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and at the risk of sounding like what I am, which is a middle-aged man, you know, in growing up and being near Coventry, because that's where I was at the time, and going into Cov on a weekend and seeing skinheads and rude boys and seeing the football tribes converging. You know, one of my earliest memories of that period is being in Cov City Centre. I think they were playing Birmingham, so you had the Zulus all turned up, you know, and it was like an army, you know. But the fashion and these lads were like, you know, they were pretty well turned out, you know, kind of Lois Feeler to cheat, you know, just the clobber was all there, deerstalker caps. Your lowest jeans had to have a little slit in the bottom so they covered the lip of your trainees. You know, it was like remarkable. So you had all that stuff in a world that was, you know, back then overshadowed by what seemed like the imminent threat of nuclear war, and it was a very different world. And I think music and you know football and the cultures around those things meant so much more to us then because that's all we had.
yeah,
You know, we didn't have the internet. We if you wanted to listen to the new single by the Jam, you had to wait for it to be released, save your pocket money, go to the shop, queue up, you know, buy it. You had to there was an investment in everything. There was an investment in music. There was an investment in people that wrote about music. You know, I watched the podcast you did with Ted Kessler the other day. You know, we kind of know each other sort of a bit. And you know, when people like that of our generation were growing up, the music press, football fanzines, the end, you know, the Liverpool fanzine and all these things were so important, so precious, you know, and you only had kind of John Peel really, to me anyway, playing the kind of music that I was into, you know, and you know, the old grey whistle test was starting to sort of recognize music other than, you know, prog rock and all that nonsense. So everything seemed really precious and important and not easily obtainable. And it gave it a value, I think, that perhaps today it isn't there.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned cigarettes and alcohol before. Part of the got a bit of a part of the Oasis story. When did you first meet the band?
So I was sat at home one evening, I think it was January 94, I think. I got a call from a mate of mine who was a promoter at a club in King's Cross in London called the Water Rats. and he asked if I could pop down and bring a few refreshments for people. And I think I said no. I think I couldn't be asked. I was kind of. I mean, just because we'll get there eventually, we might as well get there now. I'm a recovering heroin addict, and I was 19 years clean and sober last month.
Congratulations
Um,
with that.
thank you. But by 1994, I was neck deep in drug addiction, heroin addiction. And I remember this guy from the Water Rats, the promoter, Splash Club. It was that night, and he said, "Can you put?" And I think I was indoors watching Brookside. You know what I mean, smoking heroin, and just thinking, "Fucking can't be asked." And he was going, "Oh, mate, honestly, this band they're going to be." And I'd heard the name, and I think I might have even heard "Fade Away" on a cassette. Um, I think Vox magazine or Select, one of those magazines from music magazines from the 90's, they put out cassettes of up and coming artists. So I got a feeling I might have heard Fade Away, and I'd read a little bit because I studied the NME and the Melody Maker, and like on a Tuesday you could go to the Tube in Camden, you get the Melody Maker, the NME the day before everyone else would get it, and I'd run home, and anyway, so I'd heard the name. I think I'd heard Fade Away, which actually is quite a good song to this
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
The dreams we have as children fade away or whatever. And so the fella rings me up and do you want to come down? I'm like, I can't be asked. And he rang me back. He's like, oh, mate, come on. So I go to the Water Rats, and it was obvious before you even got in that something was going on, because every A&R guy that I knew, and every friend of every A&R guy, and every mover and shaker in the scene in London, I think Ted was probably, there's a lot of people say they were there. It's a bit like how many Arsenal fans were at Anfield in 1989 watching them win the fucking league? About 10 million, apparently. Or how many people were at the Sex Pistols gig at the Screen on the Green? Anyway, but I was there at the Water Rats that night, and it only holds 200 people, I think, max, that little room at the back there. And I went in and I did what I was there, sort of the fella that rung me up. I thought I'll stay and watch the band. And I was probably 15 feet away from Liam, and I was transfixed, I ain't gonna lie. I was like, whoa. And I was going out to see bands probably 5, 6 nights a week, in that period. And I had been for, a number of years. So I'd seen Suede playing in front of a handful of people, the early versions of Elastica, and so I wasn't not easily impressed. Do you know what I mean? I'm not. I am. I guess I can say it, a musical snob. I'm not easily impressed, and I think if I say that because I was so enamored by music for the reasons I've just explained from such an early age, from 11 years old, from that cassette, that if by the age of 12, 13, you know kind of every word to every song by The Who and the Pistols, and if that's your starting position, then you're not going to be easily impressed.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And
yeah, yeah.
so there was something happening in that room that I was very impressed by, and do you know what? I think as I described it in the book, it was this kind of sense that I didn't know whether we were going to watch a gig or whether there was going to be a fight. Whether Liam was going to get off stage and just start bashing. I don't, there was a real raw. They were obviously far from whatever the finished article was supposed to. It was raw. It was in your face. They finished with "I am the walrus." I was deaf by that point, and I was just like, "That's fucking," that's something. And so that was the first time I saw him, and I think between then and Nebworth, I probably saw them 40 odd times. And so I saw them go from the Water Rats in front of a couple hundred people to Nebworth, where I didn't actually watch them because I left by the time they went on.
We'll get to Leavenworth, but
Yeah.
like with Oasis, how did you then like become their like dealer?
I mean, look, I kind of need to be clear about this because, and no one was no one, no, there was no one person for anybody. I mean, for younger viewers, shall we say, that period in Britain, and Ted was talking about Britpop, whatever you want to call it, in London, which is I can only report from where I was. I mean, I travelled the country a lot, but so everybody kind of knew everybody. You go into a pub in Camden, whatever, and oh look, there's the guitarist from Long Pigs, and there's Justine, and it was very like that. It really was like that, and everybody was doing what they were doing, and some people, myself included, kind of knew people that were sort of higher up the food chain when it comes to drug dealing. And some people kind of got involved in a way that other people didn't. And some people, as James Brown, former editor of Loaded, pointed out, viewed people like me as just complete scumbags. Because what people forget is whilst a lot of people were taking a lot of drugs, a lot of people also weren't. And a lot of people, were actually at gigs for one reason only, was to listen to fucking music. And that maybe have a couple of bevies, a couple of pints, but it wasn't like everybody would. People talk about the 60s and like, oh, if you can remember it, you weren't there. Well, most people weren't there. Most people were just getting on with their lives. Not everybody could be flouncing up and down the King's Road dressed up like fucking Merlin, eating, acid and being all fucking alternative. Most people had to go to work. And in the 90's, yes, there was a massive upsurge in people, because we'd been through the house and raving and all that, and that was still going on. So I just was one of those people that was around a lot at that time doing what I was doing. I was out seeing gigs, I was out doing a little bit of this, that, and the other. And I wrote a book about it, which is now 12 years old. And people seem to have enjoyed the book and read it and found it, I suppose, that part of it to be an interesting perspective on a period of history that people are interested in,
Yeah, definitely.
which is
So
now very much under review 30 years later.
with Oasis, you were there for things like the White Room sessions,
I
uh,
was,
the hotel room for the cigarettes and alcohol cover,
yeah.
your own whatever with the hand claps.
I did the hand claps on whatever, yeah.
Are there some highlights like hanging out with the band?
Of course. Oh, listen, I mean, I witnessed something that doesn't happen very often and will probably never happen again.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Because we live in a different world, right? So it'll probably never happen again. And I saw, I guess, 2 years of it, the first couple of years from Water Rats to Nebworth, and knowing knowing that it's me doing the hand claps on whatever always makes me feel like, oh, that was nice. Introducing them on stage at the first Tea in the Park, mega. Organising the launch party for Definitely Maybe, because I did that as well.
Oh, yeah, what was that like?
Messy. Very, very messy. I did. I had an awful night because it was just too much for me. I was like, "What the fuck am I doing here?" But everyone else had a good time. My memories, which are quite vague of that night, are that I didn't really enjoy it, but everyone else did. So it's
Did
quite hard when you actually.
Primal Scream that night?
Oh, Primal Scream! So it was in a club which doesn't exist anymore called the Leisure Lounge, and they had during the day it was a snooker club, and they had two full size fucking Riley snooker tables, and Primal Scream just destroyed them and smashed them up, and I had to pay for them to, I don't know anything about snooker, but I tell you how much the snooker table costs. The whole thing was, I mean, it was just an idiot like me on too many drugs trying to organise a party, a launch party for an album that everyone wanted to be there. Liam even announced it. You can see the gig at the Astoria prior to that party. It's on YouTube, actually, the whole gig, Oasis. And Liam says at the end, "Oh, we're getting off now, Leisure Lounge party. You got, so he gave us, I'd said to him, give us a shout out because I wanted to sell some tickets because the guest list, the place only held 1,000 people, so only. and the guest list was given to me like 10 minutes before the doors opened, and there was like 2,000 people on it. So I'm like, how am I going to recover the money that I've spent buying all the drugs to give away to people, because hey, I'm whoever the fuck I thought I was. Um, it was quite a difficult night for me, the launch party for Definitely Maybe, but everyone else had a good time. And yeah, some really great memories in a very short, at a point in my life where, like I said, my addiction was something I could kind of like turned a bit of a blind eye to because I had money and everyone else was taking a ton of drugs. The fact that I was taking one that no one else wanted to talk about, or very few people, was kind of neither here nor there at the time. It became a problem very quickly after that. But so all good, and I've got loads of mates that are going to see them this summer, and I genuinely wish them the best time,
Yeah.
but I'm not remotely interested,
You know,
honestly.
the hand claps on whatever, how did that come about?
So they were recording. They'd been in a session at a studio in Fulham, which was called Maison Rouge, which isn't there anymore. And I don't, I mean, Noel probably rang me up and went, "Can you come over with, bring a few refreshments, whatever, with you?" And I remember there was me and Johnny Hopkins, who was their press guy at the time, who's a lovely fellow, and we still talk today. Brian Cannon was there. We chat from time to time. So it was just a bunch of us in the studio doing the final kind of mixes of whatever. Um, and Noel was like, right, we need some hand claps. Simon, do you want to do that? It wasn't just me, there was other people. How we managed to clap in time, considering the fucking state we were in. But we did. Um, so that was amazing. And my last kind of real memory before things kind of went the way they went is Noel rang me up once, and he hadn't bought a house at that point, and he was living in a house in West London in Chiswick that belonged to Salman Rushdie, of all people. And the reason I know that is he called me up and I'd gone over and he played me. He just recorded Some Might Say. And I was the first person outside of the band in the studio to hear Some Might Say. He said, "What do you reckon about this?" I was like, "Ah, fucking great that." And then I noticed that my mobile phone wasn't working because I was always having to check my phone for the next person that needed me to turn. And I went, "No, I got my phone." He went, "Oh, it's mad." He said, "This house belongs to Salman Rushdie and the windows are bomb-proof. They're like 3 inches thick, the glass." And he was right. It was a bomb-proof house because, at that time, Salman Rushdie's life was seriously in danger. They'd issued the fatwa against him for his book. And I guess Creation were just renting the house for Noel. And he lived in Salman Rushdie's bomb-proof house.
Jesus, that's crazy, isn't it?
There you go. There's a bit of information for your Oasis geeks there.
What do you think of the reunion then?
I mean, look, I'm not going, and I feel very fortunate that I was at that show in '94 that I saw them go from that to Nebworth, and then I lost interest. I look, and then I wouldn't go. Stadium gigs aren't my thing. I can't stand them. I just cannot stand stadium gigs. It's just not my thing. I've, like I say, I've said it again. I feel very fortunate that I saw that band and other bands as well playing, in smaller venues in front of a couple of hundred. And then my favourite venue is Brixton Academy in London. I think it holds just shy of 4,000 people. That's enough for me. Do you know what I mean? Beyond that, and I've been to a couple of stadium gigs. My daughter went to see Blur a couple of summers ago. She was only 15 at the time, so I kind of went just to not even sit in the posh seats while she was down in the front, and they were incredible. They were incredible. I really enjoyed it, but um, yeah, I'm not interested in going to see Oasis.
Do you know, with the band, you was actually at
But
like you
um,
mentioned, there's drug dealers, like, it's like, there's the higher ones that goes down the train, like,
yeah, yeah.
would there be jealousy, like, if you were dealing with the band?
no, because it's like the fucking it's a gravy train for people, isn't it? People are trying to make money, like everyone's trying to make money, I mean, that's just, so maybe it sounds a bit hypocritical of me, even though obviously I don't do that anymore and haven't done for fucking a long time. But it's, people want to latch on to something that's going somewhere. And, again, just referencing the thing he did with Teddy is absolutely right. There was a point where I had Liam's phone number, Noel's, they'd ring me, in a very short period of time, we're talking a year, maybe a bit longer. Or you could go to whatever hotel they were staying in, and Maggie, their tour manager, she'd like roll her eyes, or Ian Robinson, who's my mate, Rob, I was doing security before, oh, fucking, he's here. But, it was like a necessary evil, and people suffered it because that's what you do. Um, and then it just, when the money comes in, things change really quickly. I remember seeing them being at the Hacienda when they were playing at the Hacienda. Um, and, things had already started to change, and they had, different security people, and all of a sudden getting a laminate wasn't quite as straightforward. And then but by Nebworth, I was done. I was well done. I was just that wasn't my own addiction was so out of control that there's an hypocrisy to it. I remember walking around backstage at Nebworth, and you've got fucking it girls and Z-list celebrities, and you're sort of thinking band of the people. I don't know what kind of people they're the band of anymore. But anyway. But everyone's there for a couple of days having an amazing time, like they will tomorrow, like they will all summer. And I'm really, I'm really happy that people are going to get to see and listen to them songs. I genuinely, I really am. I'm not. This isn't sour grapes for me. I'm just not asked. Um, but even being in Nebworth and just, you know, heroin addiction, any kind of addiction is pretty unforgiving. And it's making your decisions for you. And as I wrote in the book, by the time they played Nebworth, it was well known that I had a heroin habit. And in the music industry, as in society, for reasons that might seem quite obvious, it's not a good look. But desperate people do desperate things, and when you're strung out on a drug, you're desperate. You know, And I just clearly remember walking around backstage, and people that less than a year previously had been, all right, Si, how you doing? Hey, mate, and all of a sudden we're like looking the other way, what's him, or mumble, mumble, smackhead, do, do, do. Now, if you're making people money, and I've said this before, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind me saying it because it was true. If you spoke to Sean Ryder, and the Mondays, and they were making people money, no one says a fucking thing. No one walked up to Sean Ryder and went, "You fucking dirty smackheads." You know what I mean? I'm
No,
pretty
yeah,
sure they
yeah.
didn't. You know what I mean? But people said it to me. So the trajectory of I suppose from Oasis going from where I met them at the Water Rats to Nebworth, and then they just kept on going in that direction, and I just began my plummet towards fucking hell.
There's a story in the book where you're going up to Scotland and the van breaks down.
Yeah. Yeah, so I use a royal we like so. Yeah, Oasis. We'd been out in the night before. Me and Liam had been out in Hume. We went to a rave they knocked it down years ago, but the old Hume, there was a shopping centre and a housing estate, which was notorious in the 80s and the early 90s. And I was up with Liam. I was staying with him and his then girlfriend, Cerise, I think her name was. Mm. They were living in Didsbury, and so we went to this rave, and it was mad. It was just this kind of rave on a housing estate in Hume, and just like this is fucking nuts. Very 1994, kind of. I don't think those things happen anymore. a good night out, and you know, obviously not obviously, but I didn't get any sleep. I think Liam went and got some sleep because he wasn't traveling in the van. I think he was getting driven to Glasgow, Tea in the Park. It was the first Tea in the Park festival. So I'm in the van with Noel and Griggs, Bonehead, a couple of the crew, Jason and Phil Smith, and the driver. We get nearly to Glasgow, and he pulls in to put diesel in the diesel van or petrol in the petrol, whatever way around it was supposed to be, he got it wrong. I mean, it's 50-50, isn't it? But you think someone that's employed to be a driver would check. So anyway, if it was a petrol van, he put diesel in. If it was whatever, we get like a minute up the road and the thing just stops, and he realizes what he's done. And I'm sat in the van with, you know, the weekend's refreshments, shall we say, which even if someone who is as fluent in bullshit as I can be wouldn't have been able to convince a policeman was for personal consumption, put it that way. Um, and then they decide they want a game of frisbee across the motorway, so they're playing frisbee across the motorway as we're pulled up on the side and waiting for the fucking AA van to arrive. And I'm just sat there going, "Fuck this," you know. Like, it was quite a weird couple of hours, but we got there. You know, we got to Glasgow, and I wrote this in the book because I think it's worth mentioning. So Noel and I checked into the hotel. He was kind enough to get me a room, and he's like, "Right, you're my personal chemist for the weekend." Fine. I've had worse jobs, you know. And we go to the festival and go to the bit where you get your backstage laminates, whatever it is. And I can actually, so it would have been 30 years ago this week, probably. I don't know, the first Tea in the Park, maybe. But I remember it like it was yesterday because it says a lot about the music industry. So because it's Scotland, it was raining, drizzle. And the music industry people were all huddled in the backstage bar, and there was a walk of, I don't know, a couple of 100 yards from where you got into the backstage enclosure to the bar. And I'm walking in with Noel, who, you know, he's just written and about to release, you know, one of the best debut albums of all time. His band had booked to play, I think, was it later that day, maybe like midway through the afternoon, because when people had booked it, they hadn't even released they might have released one single. So they were on after Tiny Monroe and before, you know, what they weren't headlining. It was in the King Tut's tent. Anyway, we're walking towards the bar, and then there's this fucking stampede of people, and I'm I'm assuming to come, all right, Noel, and you know, because they want to talk to Noel because he's like, you know, he's the kiddie now, right? It's Noel Gallagher. Everyone wants to be seen with the next big thing and tell him how great he is and how they've loved him since he was the roadie in Spiral Carpets and all that bollocks. And I'm sort of 10 paces behind Noel, kind of whatever, staring at my feet. And none of them want to talk to Noel. They just want to talk to me because I'm the guy with all the cocaine.
Really?
I mean, they just blank him completely. Oh, not sorry, sorry, you know. And that, I mean, that just says a lot. You know, no one had any coke, no one had any drugs for some reason, which is weird in Scotland. Whatever, no one at that point had what I had in my bag and what those people knew I had in my bag. So they just kind of walked, no, and they were more interested in me. And I mean, that says a lot, you know, really. Anyway, it made my ego fucking. But that weekend and that gig, and then Noel asked me to introduce them before they went on, and that tent, that marquee, I think I don't know how many people it's supposed to hold, 5,000, something like that. There was a lot more than 5,000 people in there, and they're all Scottish, and they're all completely off their tits on fucking Buckfast and spit whatever. And it was like an inferno in there. And I, like everybody else, was absolutely spanned on pills and this, that, and the other. And I go out to introduce them. And I suppose it's the closest I have ever or will ever get to being a rock and roll star because there's this. and there's footballs flying around, and there's people hanging off the fucking ceiling in the tent and climbing up the fucking tent poles. It's mental. It was like a real moment in time, which I believe Noel and other people have all said, in the early days, that was the point where it was like, this is really fucking happening, and I'm on the microphone introducing them, and the band have come on behind me, and Noel is playing the intro to Shaker Maker, and I don't want to get off the stage. I'm like, "What?" And Liam's tapping me on the shoulder, going, "You need to fucking get off." Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh. So I sort of slope off to the side of the stage, and they play a show, and it's phenomenal. It's just, it's. I suppose, I am a musician, and what you're always trying to do as musicians is make a connection, with other people, and when you're playing live and you're putting it out and they're sending it back, that's live music, right? That's what it's about. And that was, forget about how many drugs everybody was on. I'll never forget that, because that was a very much, it's on. This is it. This is, we're the band are playing, and the people know all the words, and there's kids fucking body surfing. And this was before photography pits were like 100 foot wide. You could be much closer to the stage, and there's people falling off the fucking seat. I mean, it was mental, and it was a moment in time, and probably not probably, in certainly in my top sort of 10 gigs of all time that I've seen.
We'll get on to your band definitely soon because it's a brilliant band. I listened to the most recent album and really enjoyed it. But I want to go in like chronological order if that's okay.
Sure.
So then in '94, you messaged me the other day actually when I shared a clip of Oasis at Glastonbury, and you told me a story. Would you like to say that on here? Or?
Yeah, well, so this we're talking the same summer, right? So I at that time in my life, 30 years ago, I'd go to Glastonbury for a month. My June was pretty much, I'd arrive at Glastonbury the first week of June, and I'd been doing that for a number of years. By 94, 95, I went to Glastonbury for the first time in 1986. And as I put on somewhere the other day, I was watching this interview with Michael Eavis from way back in the 70s, and Glastonbury was sort of part of the counterculture. It wasn't like a part of people's social calendar sandwiched in between Henley Regatta and whatever else people are doing, And that sounds like sour grapes, and it's not meant to be. I haven't been for 20 something years, and I'm sure it's still like one of the most magical places. But back then, even in the early 90's, it wasn't like wasn't for mass consumption. It was still very much seen as a bit, the general public, like, oh, it's all, whereas now it's an Instagram thing. But anyway, I was there doing my thing, and I had a small marquee set up backstage, so I could do my business and entertain people. And it was a very different world back then. Nobody had mobile phones apart from people like me. Although I had a walkie-talkie. Anyway, without getting into all that, um, just before Oasis played, so they were on the NME stage in the afternoon, and they're basically essentially playing the first album. That's all they had. Um, and Liam was being Liam, was like, he wanted to get stoned and whatever. And I um I had this lump of Indian hashish, charas is what they used to call it. I guess it's still called that, and it's very potent. It's really strong, really, really strong. And um, I packed a chillum, and if don't try this at home, kids, it's like fucking Blue Peter in it. Chillum is like a clay pipe. It looks like a carrot basically with a little stone in it, and anyway, it gets you really fucking stoned. And because he's Liam Gallagher and can't be seen to back down, and I'm sure he'd smoked a chillum before, he just absolutely mullers this chillum that I give him. And then he didn't speak for about 10 minutes afterwards. And I was getting a little bit worried because I don't think he could speak. I think he was so fucking wrecked, which is the kind of point, at that age. That's kind of. But then I think it was Phil Smith, who's one of the roadies. He went, "Liam, we're fucking on now," and he's just stood there like, Anyway, he he pulled it out of the bag and they played. But oh yeah, at one point I was like, shit, I might have over-egged that a little bit. Anyway, that was what life was like then. That's how things were back then. It was just that was normal behavior.
Like when you're dealing drugs, is somewhere like, sorry, Glastonbury or a festival where you'd make the most.
I mean, this sounds mad, Ethan. I wasn't trying to make money. I genuinely that sounds nuts, right? I was a drug addict and had been addicted to whatever drugs pretty much since I started taking them, whether it was fags, booze, speed, whatever. I was always on something from like a really early age, and before the morality police jump on me, I had a fucking, as you said, a difficult childhood. I didn't know how to live. I was deeply traumatized by my experiences as a child, and I found drugs helped me exist. They were a solution for me. And I had no issues with the morality of it all, like a lot of people at that time. And still, I think drugs should be legal, all drugs, to this day. I will argue that point with anybody who wants to fucking get into a debate with me. Drugs should be legal because the war on drugs is a fucking joke. It's a bad joke. The billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds that is made from the drug industry goes to the wrong fucking people. There are people dying every minute of every day from addiction and alcoholism. And if you could get your hands on 5% of the money that the drug cartels make, you could help a lot of people get well. Sorry, that was a bit like of a rant, right? But that's how I feel about it. Back then, my addiction hadn't become the main driver in my everyday life. I kind of knew I was in trouble, but I could sort of like kick it into the long grass and just not think about it. So I would go to a festival to turn people on. That's how I saw it. People to come in, someone's got to do it. Might as well be me. I've been going to Glastonbury for a long time. I know everybody. I know where all the good drugs are. I know how to get here, there, and everywhere. It just seemed like it wasn't something that I'd set out when I was at school. Oh, yeah, what are you going to be doing in 10 years, Simon? I was serving up drugs at a festival. It just happened. It happened and I didn't have a problem with it. And no one else had a problem with it. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's like that was the world we were in, and would I want my daughter to be doing that? No. You know what I mean? But I'm 30 years older now. Do I regret it? No. Um, People say, oh, do you have any regrets about that sort of stuff? It is what it is. That's what I was doing, and I suppose if I want to be a bit self-absorbed about it, at the end of the day, the person that suffered the most ultimately was me.
and we're
So,
not like advocating taking drugs or selling drugs, but it is part of your story. It gives us the thing of where you were and how you've come out of
yeah,
it nowadays as well,
totally.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, I don't advocate either of those things. I have a teenage daughter, as I've already said, who's growing up in Hackney, and I'd be stupid and naive to think that she's never gonna, and she has, she's already kind of, because that's life, that's the world we live in. And what I always say to her is Tabitha, you and I can always talk about this. That's it.
You mentioned with your teenage daughter. I know, obviously, maybe you could go back in time and change what happened with the drugs, but you've been through that, so you can give her advice, and obviously, you're giving other people advice as well nowadays, as well, aren't you?
Well, that's what I do for a living these days. I do the opposite of what I used to do. So if there's some sort of karmic return, that's kind of what I do. Like I say, I've been clean and sober for over 19 years, and I've worked in statutory drug services and I've worked privately and I coach people and I try and help people. If people want help, that's what I do. but I still maintain that drugs should be legal, and the whole thing needs a rethink. And and in the course of the work that I do, I've been in countries, and I've got to be a bit careful. I've been places with clients, and we've been caught with drugs, and the country or the specific part of the country we're in has a very informed and responsible attitude towards drug addiction, and they see people who are addicted to drugs as people that are ill and need help rather than fucking banging up in prison, which doesn't help anybody.
No.
So there's been a couple of incidences, where my own personal experience has absolutely got us out of jail. um, but anyway, so let's stay with the chronological thing. I think we're up to Glastonbury 94, 95, something like that.
Yeah, so
94.
you with the dealing and you mentioned like Britpop was a thing where it was like a community. So would you be with other bands as well as Oasis?
I mean, was I with them? I mean, I was with them sometimes. But I was wherever like whatever fest. Back then, you didn't have 780 music festivals every summer, or whatever there is. There weren't so many. You had sort of Glastonbury, Reading, something called Phoenix, which rumbled on for a few years up in the Midlands. Tea in the Park. I mean, there were much smaller ones, but there wasn't like fucking 100 festivals every weekend. So, you'd have gigs at, Blur at Mile End Stadium. People would put on events. The Roses at Glasgow Green. People made events rather than a sort of festival per se. And I'd go wherever I fucking felt like I could, I could, if the lineup was good. Put it this way, I wouldn't go to a festival if there was no one there I wanted to see.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd go to a music festival because I wanted to see some of the bands and I could do what I was doing with relative impunity backstage because that's what I did. I wasn't walking around the camping area going up to teenagers going, "Do you want some drugs, mate?" That's not what I did. Do you know what I mean? I was already, I guess, preaching to the converted, if you want. I wasn't out there pushing things on people. People knew what I did. They knew what I would probably have tucked away somewhere, and they came and asked me, and I went, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. With the drugs you were taking, you mentioned it was to sort of like get away from the past, really, wasn't it? And to
I,
those
I,
memories for it.
I mean, look, I was troubled and traumatized by what had happened to me. There's no getting around that fact. But I didn't know that at the
Yeah,
time. Right, I didn't have an understanding of it like I have now with a long time in recovery and my recovery technique is that I work a 12-step NA program. It's not for everybody, but it works for me. And I've had some therapy and I've had a lot of time to reflect and look back on why things, and I wrote a fucking book and I've done a lot of podcast stuff. I have talked about myself quite a lot, for better or worse, and I've learned, and I've developed an understanding of why I was the way I was. Now, some of that information is also relevant in other people's stories. There are there are far cleverer individuals than me that study addiction like forensically and pathologize about it and are clinical about it and will say, look, it's about trauma and it's always about trauma and it's always about a disconnect and all this kind of stuff. And I agree with some, but not all of that, because I've met people that had every advantage in life, from an early age, a loving family home, mum, dad, fucking pony club, supported fucking Man United, whatever, when they were good, which is a long time ago. And they've still ended up on their knees,
yeah,
for addiction. But thankfully, let's be clear, most people when they get into that world, will probably have a few nights out they regret and make a few bad choices, But for the most part, they come through it unscathed and probably better people for it, and they've had a good time, and it's an inherent part of growing up and being young, and go to a festival. One of my favourite bands at the moment is from Leeds. My two favourite bands currently are English Teacher and Yard Act. Both from
Oh yeah, yeah.
Leeds, and James, who I'd love to meet, I've never met him, from Yard Act, is for my money the best lyricist on the planet at the moment, certainly up there. The way he observes human nature and people and whatever, and their set last year at Glastonbury was, I had to watch it on iPlayer. It was fucking unbelievable. And he said it before Glastonbury: go to Glastonbury, take drugs, have a good time. Because most people are going to go home on Monday or Tuesday and go back to work. They might be a bit battered, but they've had, they're not like me, who will be there for a month. Michael Eavis had to ask me to leave one year. We'd been there probably 6 weeks. It was like middle of July, and we were still holed up in some field that, taking drugs. And he was just like, "You got to go." So, that's what addiction does to people. Most people, thankfully, don't have that experience.
You mentioned there the lyricist in Yard Act. That's what I was going to say with your band as well. I think your lyrics are brilliant and your book was brilliant. Have you always had that like fascination with writing?
I mean, I guess, like I said before, the bar was set quite high for me with the artists that, Dylan and Pete Townsend, I think, is a genius in the same way as Beethoven, Mozart, Michelangelo, and the guy that invented the internal combustion engine, whatever. And they set the bar quite high, and words have always been important to me. I'm an awful guitar player. I can write songs, and I'll say that about myself. I can write a song, on that. Um, but I've spent a lot longer trying to write words, and I've written a follow up to the book, which is nearly finished. I mean, it's going to be like 12 years afterwards, because I think what's happened since that book was published is almost as crazy in some respects as what the first book was about, and some of the stories of addiction. And I also think it's important that there are books about people in recovery and what they've done. And I'm not saying my story is any more or less valuable than anyone else's, but I've done stuff, or I've tried to do stuff, and I've achieved stuff that I was never going to achieve when I was a drug addict. And one of the big issues when I'm working with people, particularly creative people in addiction, is that they think when they stop taking drugs or drinking that their creativity will dry up. Whereas my experience has been the exact opposite of that. Having said that, most of the albums I grew up listening to were written by people completely off their tits. And there's a great sketch by the late, great American comedian Bill Hicks about all that sort of stuff. If you've got 5 minutes, just go on YouTube, Bill Hicks, drugs, and he nails it. Um, so, um, so words are important. It's probably why I lost interest in Oasis, to be honest. Because no one's going to tell me they're into it because of the lyrics.
Yeah, the lyrics are crazy. The music on obviously the songs are fantastic, but yeah, some of the lyrics in like songs like Shake and Maker and Dixie's Dinner and that.
Well, I actually thought they were the better ones because they were quite sort of psychedelic. Anyway, without getting into all that, so words are important, and and I write, and I've kind of tried to keep writing, and I've just written a new album which I'm going to start recording in a couple of months' time, which is exciting for me. I don't know about anyone else, but yeah.
Yeah, brilliant and well done with all that, like coming out of that dark end of things and just turning your life around and doing what you always wanted to do, really, didn't you?
I think again it was. I'm going to sound quite what's the word I'm looking for? A bit of a knob, actually, but I'll say it. All the really good things that have happened to me in my recovery in the last 19 years, pretty much all of them have come as a result of trying to sort of help other people. it's not like I didn't go, right, I'm a year clean and now I'm going to do this, or I'm 2 years clean, I'm going to do. I kind of, I was 36 when I got clean. I didn't have a CV of so that was much use. Do you know what I mean? Put it that way. There was a big gap between leaving school and 2006, where if you just put, yeah, I was a heroin addict, it's not going to get you much employment. So I started doing the sort of things that a lot of people in early recovery do. I went to work in a drug and alcohol treatment center as a volunteer, because I'm like, well, I know about addiction, because I guess I did. I had some experience of it anyway. And I kind of enjoyed the work, and I found out that I was competent, shall we say. But it wasn't I didn't have a plan. Even I still haven't got a plan, a life plan. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just don't have a plan. I kind of just have this overriding sense that things are going to be okay if I don't have a drink and if I don't pick up a drug a day at a time. For the most part, things have been better than okay. There was no life plan when I was 12, and I still haven't got one. Um, and the whole putting a band together and making an album came about really as a result of um, supporting a musician that I keep mentioning Ted Kessler. It's like Ted and I are both enthralled by Mick Head, Michael Head, the songwriter in Shack and the Red Elastic Band. We would both go on record and say he's the greatest songwriter. In fact, he has said it. Ted, this country's ever produced. And Mick and I had a mutually beneficial experience, shall we say. A few years ago, he came to stay with me for a while when he was in a bad place, and he's not in a bad place anymore. And I'm delighted to see that. And I went to see Shack when they reformed in May in Liverpool, the same weekend as I saw us beat Tottenham and win the league. Um, don't get me started. You won't get me started. Don't. Anyway, what was the point of that? The point of all that is what I was trying to say is that when Mick came to stay with me, my guitar, this guitar, was sort of gathering dust in the corner of my front room. I'd kind of look at it occasionally, and I hadn't picked it up for a while. And one night we sat up, we were talking, and Tabitha, my daughter, was only 7, I think, at the time, maybe 8, and she was asleep, and she came in the front room. And this is actually a beautiful story, so I think it's worth telling. And she was like rubbing her eyes, going, "Oh, Daddy, I can't sleep." And Mick was like, "Oh, Tabitha, go and sit on your dad's knee. I'll play you a song." And he picks the guitar, he literally blows the dust off it, and he starts playing a load of his songs, Shaq songs that are like seriously etched into my very fucking soul. And I'm just sat there thinking, this is mad. Mick Head sat in my front room playing as long as I've got you, so long as I've got you, and whatever. And I'm crying, and he's crying, and Tabitha's crying because the two grown-ups. She doesn't know why she's crying. We're all just having a moment, and she falls asleep in my arms, and I go and put her to bed, and Mick just keeps playing and playing, and I just get this like concert basically. Mick Head playing. He said, "What do you want to hear next?" I'm like, uh, "Anything." And then he finishes playing, and he hands me the guitar, and he says, "You need to start writing songs again." Because we've been hanging out for about a year by that point, and whatever, we've been doing things, and he knew that I write, and we had like a hashtag Hightown Pirates from a trip to Hightown, which is a suburb of Liverpool that we've been out there a couple of times, and he just said, "You need to start writing songs." And I'm kind of like, okay, if you say so, Mick, I will, and I'll try and get some of these words. So I literally was like, my hand was like, what does that do? Kind of trying to learn to play guitar a bit. And a few months later, I was on tour with the Libertines and Pete Doherty, and we had the same kind of experience. Peter going, "You need to fucking write songs." And touring with the Libertines, and I'll say this. I completely missed them when they arrived. I was so far down the fucking heroin crack addict. I was fucking living on the streets. I wasn't going to see gigs. I was full 24/7 smackhead junkie. So I completely missed them. I was aware of them somewhere, but I couldn't, I had no real, um, I just didn't get them. I didn't get it. And I was probably in early recovery, didn't have the open-mindedness to go, well, that's just Peter's journey or their journey. And they're on fucking smack. I can't have anything to do with that because I'm clean now. And that's probably the truth of it. I'm a little bit more informed these days. Anyway, we've become friends and I'm touring with them and I saw and it made I was like, I get it now. I get the Libertines. Now I see what it's all about. This kind in the same way as the Clash were like or a lot of great bands, on any given night they could be untouchable or a fucking shit show.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of live music.
No, yeah,
You know,
definitely. They are a great band
uh,
on the day, aren't they? But like you say,
I believe it or not, I saw Oasis be absolutely fucking shocking on more than one occasion, and that's the investment and that's why we love it. Like it's like football, I mean, it's like on paper, you put your best 11 out and go, we're going to fucking smash these. And then you lose 1-0 at home to Nottingham Forest and go, what the fuck was that all?
I've seen a lot of shit with Leeds, so it's more shit than good
Well,
actually. But
but so it's all that sort of thing. And both those people, Mick Head and bless him, Peter Doherty, who I'm going to be seeing Saturday because the Libertines are down here in Margate playing, were both really, really supportive. I didn't have any notion, I didn't have that kind of self-confidence that I could really write a song. I think that had been sucked out of me in my addiction. But when you've got Mick Head and Pete Doherty telling you these lyrics are fucking boss, man, you can't argue with those two, right?
no, exactly. I listened to the most recent album, and I thought that was
Yeah.
brilliant.
It's a very lyrical album. I
Yeah,
actually find it not hard to listen to. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of them all. The circumstances of making that album was it was fucking really hard work and it wasn't pleasurable, unfortunately, for reasons I won't bore you with. It was like, but I think lyrically, I hit a really good spot, and there's a couple of really, really great songs on there, and some which listen. I mean, no one puts out. I'm not giving myself a hard time. Um, if you're into lyrics, I think it's probably lyrically my best. Um, and there's some incredible songs and some great musicianship, but it was difficult to make. Like I say, for reasons I won't bore you with. But my point that I was trying to make was about how all that happened. Again, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to release an album. I was like 45, put my first record out. I got caught up in it. I lent into it. I assembled some musicians that were friends of mine that I'd known for years and years and years, and we were fortunate that someone gave us a little bit of money and we could go to a residential recording studio. This is for Dry and High, the first album. And we had, girlfriends and partners and kids and dogs. We just set up in this fucking studio called Doghouse in Henley on Thames and just built this vibe. There was laughter and there was fucking joy and it felt very much like sort of like an unfinished business because I had been writing songs since the 90's and the addiction had just stopped. There was so Matty Purslow who played on the first album, had been my kind of is still my oldest friend. He'd been involved with that. And when I rang him up and said, "Do you want to actually make this album?" He was like, "Yeah, I do," because we just didn't do it before. So there was that whole thing going on, and I think it in the first album there is a real joy to it. There's a real kind of there's a darkness and there's a joy, but there's always a darkness and a joy in what I write because that's what I write about.
yeah,
Darkness and joy and redemption. And if you put a horn section from Liverpool on an album, it's going to fucking have this. It's going to have that come on kind of vibe to it. And I put them on a lot. Martin Smith and Simon James. And I'm really lucky that I've had these incredible musicians from Liverpool that have helped me. I can't. I'm not a one man band. I'm the exact opposite of that. I need Like I need people in my recovery. I need people to sort of check my thinking. I've always needed other people. I didn't get 19 years clean on my own.
Yeah,
Far from it. I've always needed other people, and I believe that I always will need other people. And I don't see that as a weakness. I see that as a fucking blessing. Um, and musically, I need other people. Yes, I can sit here and I can write a song, or the chords and the melodies and the lyrics and probably the arrangement, but I'm going to need other people when I get to the studio who can play guitar better than me. So, that's kind of how people are. You're the lightning rod to it all, and you get people and you have a connection with them and hopefully make it work.
yeah, definitely. Well, all this came about from getting clean, like you mentioned. So I want to go back to like, when you were dabbling in drugs at the start, when did it become an addiction?
I mean, I drank every day from age 16. There wasn't a day where I didn't have alcohol, or not smoke weed or hash or whatever. It wasn't. Well, once I was out of school, I left home when I was 16 and a half, I think. Yeah. I ran away to London when I was 17. And I was up and running, but again, like I said earlier, I wasn't aware that I didn't see that I was addicted to something. It was just what I did. I always had a lump of hash in my pocket. There was always a drink somewhere at some point during the day. And I didn't see it as a problem, probably because it wasn't a problem. It was just part of what I did, part of what everyone that I hung out with more or less did. Um, but I remember the first time I experienced heroin withdrawal. Um, and I remember thinking to myself, this isn't very pleasant, actually. But my way of getting through the first time, and I ended up doing fucking hundreds of them, was I just took lots of other drugs. So I kind of soothed the edges by taking lots of other drugs. And then I just took lots of other drugs, and I always kept on going back to that. Smack was the thing that ultimately for me did it, whatever it is, the one that gave me the most relief from myself. And there aren't really, to the best of my knowledge, many happy endings when it comes to heroin addiction. You know, you clean up or you die.
Yeah, yeah, only goes one or two ways, doesn't it?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. I mean, where I live in Margate, it gets labelled as this kind of, oh, it's all trendy Shoreditch on Sea. I mean, there's some of that here, like there is in every fucking city. You can get smashed avocado on toast in Leeds, right? You've got fucking Harvey Nichols, mate. You're like posh, right? So the world's changed, right? But like there is everywhere, there are a lot of people where I live. I mean, I can open my shutters now, and I'll guarantee you, I'll see someone walking past with a can in their hand on their way to school drugs within
Really?
within 2 minutes. Yeah. So I see what addiction looks like 20 years more or less after I managed to find a way out of it, and it hasn't changed. It's still in areas where people see there's no hope for them. It's probably passed down through generations of families. I see mothers and daughters smoking crack in the phone box round the corner. There's a whole different tragedy of that. The drug that is really doing people serious damage here in Margate, apart from alcohol, which is killing most of them, is spice. That's everywhere down here at the moment. So there's loads of that, and my heart goes out to people. And I've tried to start some recovery groups here in Margate because it's not actually that difficult to do. I don't want to make myself sound like the fucking Dalai Lama. I'm not, but it's something I can do, and I've tried to do something for the community, and I continue to try and do that. But it's a stark reminder of how difficult getting clean is,
Yeah.
because there are people here that know my history. That some guy stopped me in the street. It's only ever happened once since my book was published, and went, "I fucking read your book, man," and he was like off his cake. You know what I mean? He said, yeah, because I'd lent it to a homeless person I'm mates with, my mate Paul, who's a lovely guy, but he's fucked. But, if if I see him, I'll buy him something to eat. And he's really intelligent. He's really, really, really intelligent. And you know, everyone's got a story. There's a reason why someone sat outside the cash point, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
begging for money. No one chose to be there when they were kids. And this kid's he's not a kid, he's a man, he's super smart, but he's lost the idea there's a way out. He's just resigned himself to it. And and he reads a lot. And I saw him reading one month he was reading the Bible, the next week he was reading the Quran. You know, he was studying religion. So I thought, oh fuck it, if you read the Bible and the Quran, you might as well read Too High, Too Far, Too Soon. Quick plug there, still available, second hands on Amazon. Um, and he read it and he told all the other addicts. Like that wasn't my intention. I just thought he'd actually enjoy it because he's like not much younger than me, you know, and we grew up in similar times. And I was walking up North Down Road here in Margate a couple of weeks later, and they were like, "Hey, mate, fucking, do you still see Oasis?" I was like, "No, fucking not." And I listen. We've got an NA meeting on a Wednesday night. If anyone wants to, you know, thinks that they might want to stop using, and they're just sort of like, "Nah, you're all right."
You know,
Yeah.
like I
Anyway.
wanted to ask you about that, actually. Like, you can go up to somebody and say, like, you should stop drugs or whatever. You know what I mean? Or we've got these meetings to go to. But if there is somebody watching this with a drug addiction, what advice would you give them?
Well, for one thing, I'd never tell anybody what they should do. You know, if people are using drugs, then and they can do it and not end up fucking, you know, in the state that I ended up in, then more power to them. You know what I mean? I'm like I said, I'm not anti-drugs. I think addiction, any kind of addiction, is a dreadful thing for someone to experience and the families of people to experience and loved ones, and it's just fucking horrible. And I really wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. If there is anyone watching this and they think I might have a problem and they want to talk to me, then you know my socials on Instagram. I'm 5 weeks clean off Facebook.
Really? It's
Yeah,
shit Facebook, isn't it?
it's just fucking shite. I mean, it's all shit really, but that's the shittest. I
Yeah, yeah,
just it just became the opposite of what it once was. You know, it was like what it used to be. You could see what your mates are up to and share a bit of this, that, and the other, and maybe drop one of your songs or a video. And now it's just so I've been that, but I've stayed on Instagram and I'm on Blue Sky. I'm quite enjoying Blue Sky. You know, I got rid of Twitter when Elon Musk took over. I'm just not giving him any fucking anything. So I do a bit of Blue Skies, Hightown Pirates, and I do Instagram. So if there is anyone who wants to ask me a question privately, then they can find me on there.
yeah. I'll leave you social media links in the.
Yeah, but I'm happy to talk to any lads that think they might have a problem or want a bit of advice or whatever.
Yeah, brilliant. So even like with the drugs, it's not just the drugs that are destroying your life. Even it like you're in a world of like violence and things like that as well, aren't you?
I saw, I remember this. I mean, I was in some crack house on an estate in Hackney, and I'd been there for like 2 days because I just couldn't leave. You know what I mean? I had money. I don't know. I was just, and it was a boiling hot day outside, and we're in this tiny bed sit right in the middle of the Pembury estate in Hackney, which was a fucking naughty place to be back then. And there's a gun on the table, and there's a fucking knife, and there's just a bunch of crackheads, myself included, addicts, sat around this table smoking crack and fucking injecting heroin or whatever we were doing. And this one, an off the cuff comment. One guy said to another guy who just whatever he heard it the wrong way. And he just picks up this knife and just slashes this guy right across the fucking face, just like just claret fucking everywhere. And then we just carried on, like nothing had happened. The guy goes and fucking gets a rag or something and he's cleaning his face up and then they just smoked the crack again. It was mental, you know, and I've seen guns pulled on people. I mean, when I was a young man and lived in Los Angeles, you know, I had a gun pulled on me twice. It's not, it's fucking frightening. It's not until you've got someone, you know, deranged out of their mind pointing a gun at you thinking, if that's fucking real, which in America it probably is, maybe not so much here, So there's just the thing about the drugs industry, and because that's what it is, it's an industry, is it's not nice. Do you know what I mean? It's not a nice business. It's dripping in blood and suffering of people, without getting all preachy, because like I said, I think drugs should be legal, but for your cheeky line on a fucking Friday night, someone's probably died in the process of getting that to you. The 120,000 people in Mexico last year murdered, part of how many in Colombia and all these places. It's not a pretty industry, and there's a lot of blood in it, and there's a lot of suffering. So, that sounded like I was moralizing, but that's the truth. The whole thing's grim.
Yeah, yeah. You were in and out of rehab, and you'd say I'm going to get clean, and then obviously drugs had come back into your life and stuff. What was the moment where you're like, this is definitely it now, I'm going to get clean?
I mean, I had 14 inpatient detoxes to try and get off heroin and crack. I completed them all and then would use very shortly afterwards. I had 7 stints in residential rehab and then in a dry house afterwards. To me, it was from Nebworth, 96,
That's
Nebworth
it.
first. So I got clean in 2006, right? So from Nebworth in 96 to 2006, I had 10 years of trying to get clean and stay clean. So I kind of knew the game was up. When you walk out of Nebworth and there's like 120,000 people walking towards you and you're going, I'm going home because I haven't got any smack, right? You can't put a spin on that you're doing all right. I knew that I was in trouble, a lot of trouble. I didn't know how much trouble, but I knew it was quite a lot, with the addiction stuff.
You know that in the moment, or is it only later down the line? You know that?
As I've said on a few occasions before, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you've got a needle and you're injecting heroin into your neck, right? Because you can't get a vein anywhere else, and you're looking at yourself going, "This isn't really a good look." You know what I mean? And there's someone on your floor who's OD'd and they're fucking twitching because they've hit an artery or whatever, and there's and that's like an everyday occurrence, right? That's what my life was like, for a lot of years, interspersed with a trip to rehab and then a few months sort of clean but not clean and sober. I'd always pick up a drink, and then for me that's just the beginning of the end. You know what I mean? I'd have a drink and then sooner or later I'm back on other drugs. Um, there wasn't. I didn't know. The day I got clean, I didn't know I was going to get clean that day.
Yeah.
I'd been to all those rehabs. As I wrote in the book, my ex-wife had offered me somewhere to stay so I could detox for a couple of weeks and then go and see my sister and her kids, and because they were like they've finished, they were done with me. Like, you've either come here 2 weeks clean or we're finished. We can't do this anymore. Because all this is like really self-centered. Oh, poor me. But there's a family. I've got an extended family, and my sister, my kids, my mum who was alive at the time. There were people that cared about me that are also affected. And actually affected in a probably more profound and deeper way because they have no say in what's going on. It's like, every time I come out of rehab, oh, this time's for keeps, I'm gonna do, and they like sort of get their hopes up, and then, it's not. It's like people that keep going in and out of jail, they're kind of every time is like, right, I'm gonna go straight this time. And the rates of recidivist behavior are fucking through the ceiling. So, I got clean, and I don't know what date it was because I was psychotic and mental and on a lot of drugs. But essentially, what happened was I walked into an NA meeting and I haven't used since. And when I say I needed people in my recovery, it was people in NA in London that fucking put their arms around me and literally carried me, whilst I went cold turkey. And it was, I mean, I will say this, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was fucking horrible. I was coming off a lot of methadone, Valium, alcohol, crack, heroin, cold turkey, no detox, just fucking stopped. It's really dangerous, by the way,
Is it
especially
like
with the booze.
how it's portrayed in Train Spotting when he comes off of it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the reason that film, impacted on a lot of people of my age generation was because they were like, yeah, that's about it. It's look, I mean, there's never really been a good football film, has there? You know what I mean?
No,
There's
yeah, I
because
agree.
you've got to go. You know what I mean? I don't really understand why people watch festivals on telly. It's like, what do you want to watch? Go to the festival or don't. You know what I mean? Of course, I understand why people watch festivals. They want to see Rod Stewart fucking waving a Union Jack in front of all the Daily Mail readers at Glastonbury. Um, so I think Train Spotting was, yeah. I mean, Danny Boyle did a good job there. But I've got to say it. That when that came out, we were all doing heroin, and we were like, didn't put us off.
Really.
That's not going to happen to me.
Have you
You
heard that
know,
a lot in your life?
well, who, like I said before, I didn't wasn't in my life plan to be injecting heroin and crack in my neck
No, exactly. You
with
make
someone dying on the floor and me going, "You selfish cunt," excuse my language, in my flat. How fucking dare you die in my flat?
Does it make you a selfish person as well, then?
Completely. Absolutely. I mean, look, there are people, and I've met people who have, financially can sort of, for a period of time, afford an addiction. They will have people running around fetching and carrying for them. And so they have a different kind of journey through that particular journey. For people like me, I'm robbing shit out of Sainsbury's. You know what I mean? I'm like on my toes, scurrying around fucking London trying to steal things that aren't nailed down. That's what happens to me. And so the consequences of that on a daily basis are really apparent. You know, as I've said, there are people that can financially afford to have a pile of whatever it is they're into, at all times. And so, as Keith Richards famously once said, I didn't have a problem with drugs, I had a problem with the police.
You mentioned you're 19 years sober. Congratulations on that. It's a brilliant thing. So what?
Better than being dead.
So what is life like for you these days?
Um, it's all right. I enjoy my life. Um, I work as a sober coach, like an addiction counsellor, not in a clinical way, so I don't have any letters behind my name. What I've got is 20 years of my own addiction and 19 years of recovery and many years working in public sector and a few years working privately. And I kind of think I know what I'm talking about. So I've just come back from 4 months away, interspersed with a few weeks in Liverpool to watch us win the league. Sorry, that's only twice I've mentioned it in an hour. Um, and see Shaq, obviously. Um, and I'm kind of a bit exhausted because it's very much one-way traffic. You're working with one person that's in a bad space and you're trying to help them get to a better space. But I love it. It's what I'm good at. Um, you're not going to make any money releasing albums. I could fucking release Pet Sounds tomorrow. No one would really give a fuck. But I get it. It's fine. Um, I go and watch Liverpool a lot. I'm really blessed. I'm fortunate. I've got a couple of I've got a lot of good friends up there. But I have a little room that I stay in when I go up there for the weekend, and it's a 5 minute walk from Anfield, so I go to the game. Um, Married. My daughter's 17. She's finishing her last exam at school today. And I think this is actually really important because I talk about her a lot. I've obviously seen what addiction does to families. I've seen the effects it has on wives, children, the effect it had on my wife at the time, it really fucking hurt her. And particularly the effect it has on children. And my daughter's never seen me drink or take a drug, and which in itself is great for me and her. Um, but more importantly than that, I think I think I could say I've never promised her something that I can't deliver because I'm pissed, or I've never promised I'll be somewhere and not turned up and let her down. No, I'm not a perfect human being, far from it. But that's really important to me, and that I've been able to use my own life experiences to try and help her navigate her way through a very different world to the one that I grew up in. I
Yeah.
think being a teenager now with fucking Instagram and influencers is fucking a nightmare. I mean, back when I was making a tit of myself, unless you were there, no one saw it.
It'd be viral now, wouldn't it? All
Now it's
everywhere.
fucking yeah, yeah. So so that's been like one of the wonderful things is that some of the things that I've learned that other people in recovery have passed on to me, the sort of collective wisdom, if you want, um, has kind of trickled down into her. Like she doesn't hold resentments against people because that's
Yeah.
something I try not to do because it's toxic. You don't need to be doing that. They're not being affected by it. You are. That's some really basic nuts and bolts recovery stuff. But she's learned that kind of stuff, and I'm free to do what I want. That might, again, people take that for granted, but when you're chained to a fucking chemist to get your methadone or whatever, you're not free to go anywhere until you've got that, or you've got an addiction, you've got to get that sorted out. Nothing happens until that's sorted out. And that's something that I don't take for granted, that I can go where I want, when I want. And whether it's football or a gig or just a holiday, or we've just borrowed a camper van off a friend of ours who's away for the summer, sat outside in the window there, got to fill it up and just go for a drive around England for a bit, because I can.
Yeah, like
That's
it's brilliant to see how you're doing well. Like I say, you've got your life back, really, haven't you?
I mean, I've got a very different life. I think that's important to say is that, look, I took drugs for 20 years and 5, 6 of it was fucking fantastic and I wouldn't change a thing. And then it started to get quite dark. And in the last 10 years was an absolute nightmare, not just for me, but for anybody that was around me. Like I said, my mum, God rest her soul, and fortunately, I got clean, and my mum ended up with dementia. She was very old when she died a few years ago, but she knew that I was clean. She never knew the depths of my addiction because she didn't see it because I kept it from her because I didn't live anywhere near her, and I'd tap her up for money. I'm gonna pretend that I didn't because I did. But she was able to know before her dementia kicked in that her son, was clean and sober and happy and had a happy life and was doing things and trying to help other people. Now, as a parent myself, that's all I really fucking care about is that Tabitha's all right,
Yeah.
really, and Liverpool win the league again.
How do you think they'll do next season, Liverpool?
Well, I mean, like I said before we started the podcast, and we've just seen that news about Diogo Jota. That is just tragic,
Yeah, it's bad, very
really
bad.
tragic. And it actually, to be honest, Ethan, kind of to be serious for a minute, I don't really think maybe now is not the time to talk about what Liverpool are going to do next season. I think out of respect to Diogo and his family, just respect to them.
Yeah, it's very sad. And like you've had the tragedies. Well, luckily there were no tragedies, but you had the thing with the trophy parade as well. That
Oh
is,
man, it's just look, there's some just proper fucking bellends in this world, and I look, football supporters are football supporters, and the vast majority of us are just people that want to go and support our team whenever we can and have a laugh and sing songs about other people
yeah, yeah,
and kind of get it off your chest and enjoy the game, and hopefully your team turns up and puts in a fucking shift for you because you paid a lot of money to get there, right? That's what most of us, I believe, are like. But like anywhere else, there's some proper dickheads, and Liverpool Football Club are not immune from that either. I don't actually know what the end result of that thing at the parade because I've been away since it happened and I haven't really been watching the news. I've just switched off from the news. I don't know whether the guy's been at court. I don't know what happened. I had a lot of friends obviously were there that day. Um, and you sort of think, is that taking the shine off it a little bit? But again, I don't think today's the day really to talk about. that much. I just think that's just such sad news with Diogo Jota. Really, it's tragic.
Yeah, it's very sad. And yeah, it's just when I saw the news, it's one of those. It just shocks you, doesn't it?
Well, you just think. I suppose what the not the lesson. That's the wrong word. We see people, footballers, professional footballers, and think, well, they've got this amazing life and they earn fucking stupid money and they get overpaid for kicking, a ball around. Yeah, and then they die in car crashes too. Money doesn't protect you from life.
Yeah,
Life
exactly.
life still happens, and it's just happened there. And like I said, he's a young man who's just got married, he's got 3 children, and that's just a fucking tragedy, whatever way you
Yeah.
look at it, whoever you support.
No, yeah, totally, it really is. You mentioned you work on part two of the book.
Yeah.
Um, have you got any sort of idea where that?
So, so the new book is called The Other Side of Nothing, which is also going to be the title of the new Hightown Pirates record, which might be an EP or might be an album. It depends. I don't know yet. It'll be something. It'll certainly be an EP. If I can find some more money, it might be an album. But anyway, so The Other Side of Nothing. If you look up the word nothing in a dictionary, it's described. It says nothing, adjective, um, uh, a void, null, no prospects. That's what this definition of the word nothing is. I only knew that because I looked it up, obviously. So I think that's a pretty good description of addiction. No prospects, void, nothing, null. So the other side of nothing is what happened next.
Yeah, yeah.
So too far too soon. I can't even say it myself. I don't actually think I've got a copy of it either. Kind of ends, and then there's a little bit about the first few years of my recovery that I write about in a non-prescriptive way. I don't tell people how to do recovery. I know what works for me. Might not work for anyone else, but other people, but it works for me. But I guess the stuff with meeting Mick Head and getting to know Pete Doherty and watching my daughter grow up and all these things that have happened musically and personal private life stuff and just sort of finding a sense of happiness and and sorry, third time, actually being at Anfield and watching Liverpool win the league, like being there, whatever your footballing persuasion, the other stuff that's all things that I didn't think would happen. I thought being sober would be boring. I really did. I thought being clean and sober would be boring. And so I think if there's any importance to this next book, it's to try and demonstrate that it's fucking not boring, or it doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And that you can have a go at things that you previously might have given up on. You can certainly try. And the joy is in the doing, it's not in the result. Like I said, I'm at that age now where I could release fucking Pet Sounds or Sergeant Peppers, and no one's really going to give a shit. You know what I mean? It's really hard, the music industry. My stepson is Laurie McMahon. He's ridiculously talented singer songwriter, young guy. And you just sort of think, how do how do bands, or I mean, bands don't make that. There aren't bands. It's all so and so featuring so and so, and it's just a very different world. And I've got to say it, I think it's a very kind of middle class driven. If you've got money, you've got a
yeah,
bit more chance than if you're just some, girl or boy from a housing estate with a guitar. It's like fucking how the fuck are you going to get anywhere unless someone's backing you? Because you can't get your hands on any money to do it. You need someone else to pay for it. I mean, a lot of the things you can do these days yourself, you can, but I just, I don't know. I think it was always been hard. It was always more than a 1 in a million chance that anyone was going to get anywhere. The world's not fair. Some absolute shite gets through. I don't know how many films I've sat and watched and gone, how did they fucking convince someone to pay 20 million quid to make that?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and then you read scripts or books, you think, why isn't that a film? Or how did that band sell out? because that's how the world is, right? It's
Yeah.
you need a bit of luck, you need a rub of the green and all that. Um, so it's a strange old world. But the second book is kind of just my attempts to this just sounds like a little cringe expression, live my best life.
Yeah, well, I think that's a brilliant note to end on. And thank you so much for joining me and hearing your story and stuff. I'll leave, like I said, the link to your social media and your
Yeah,
book and
yeah.
things like that, and so people can check it all out.
Good to talk to you, Ethan. Have a lovely day.
Nice one, Simon. Thank you. You too.
Maybe I'll see you at Ellen Road next season.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah. Will you be coming up for the game?
I fancy it. Yeah, I think I can. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Let me know. Yeah.
yeah. You can be my security guard. Yeah. So I know him, lads. He's not even a fucking scouser, but he does hate Man United.
Yeah, exactly. We all do, don't we?
We certainly do.
Nice one. Thank you.
Take care, mate.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.